Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to another edition of Flourishing with Hope with the girl Saturi. Well, looks like we have guests. We have Vanilla. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Vanilla and Oreo. See, they decided they want to join, so who am I to stop them, right? So let's get this party started. Okay, my name is Flourishing with Hope, but like I said before, there are times when you're flourishing. Flourishing with hope doesn't mean that every day is going to be all sunshine and smiles, right? Remember, like hope, as I've explained what hope is, that palm tree that went through some struggles and now hope is growing and flourishing. Okay, so it's the same thing with life. Well, life for me at least. Everyone's life is different. Life's experiences are different. So I can only speak about life through my lens. And growing up, life has been, there's some high and some lows. And those high and lows are the moments that shape an individual, right? So the name of this edition is the Unpacking. Why do we need to unpack? You remember going to grade school, as my Americans would say, or elementary. In Jamaica, we can think back primary school days, or even some early days of high school, when we used to walk around with those heavy backpack until, we used to walk on our shoulders. Okay. That was so uncomfortable, right? Very uncomfortable. And even think about an airplane. An airplane, if you overload an airplane, that will never lift at the end of that runway. It will never take flight of that runway, or else it drop out of the sky, right? So it is necessary to unpack so we can cut the dead weight, the unnecessary weight that's going to hinder you from taking flight, right? Or else you'll never fly at the altitude at which you need to be, right? So it's necessary to unpack so you can get lighter. You can cut the dead weight so you can be more free. You can be light. So for me to start flourishing, I had to unpack some stuff, and it's not the physical, well, yeah, some physical stuff too, but unpacking mental stuff or the unseen stuff or emotional stuff is just as important as unpacking physical stuff. So if you unpack the physical stuff around you, yeah, you feel like everything's fine, but you still need to unpack some emotional stuff, right? It's just as important, or else you're gonna be heavy. You won't take flight. You won't fly at the altitude at which you should be, right? So for me, the first thing I had to unpack was fear. And I had to unpack a couple stuff, right? Fear. What is fear? Well, fear is that crippling feeling that can paralyze you from living at your fullest potential, right? And I never noticed that until I started going to Christ Fellowship. I never realized how fretful I was, and I did not understand why until it traces back. I had to trace back to, why am I so fearful, or why do I feel like I'm not flourishing? When in truth and in fact, I may have been flourishing, but I still needed some pruning. I still needed to unpack some stuff, right? And fear was one of those, and I'm like, why am I so fearful? But when I think back to why I was fearful, and again, this is not to bash anyone or to blame anyone, it's because of my upbringing and the way I grew up. how I grew up wasn't all bad. It wasn't all bad. So don't think I'm playing the violin and saying all that. You know, there were good times, but there's something that made me fearful, and fear stems into other things, right? Fear stems the fear stems from things and it stems into other things. For me, the fear stemmed from living a rejected life, meaning, you know, in it still happens today, but it's not so prevalent, right? Where kids who are born out of wedlock, they're seen as bastard children, and they're not just seen as bastard children, they are treated as such. Like you know, they treat you less favorable than other kids that were born in wedlock or born in favorable situations. Things and times have changed now where people don't really do that anymore. But what replaces that in today's world is classism and the status thing, where people are treated based on how the parents are treated. That's just the reality. Those are just facts. It's not right, but it's facts because I've seen it, still seeing it, right? So some family members may feel like they're on the top of the hierarchy and some are down there, and that's just how it's set. You should know your place, stay in that place. Who sits on the top stays on the top, and stays on the top, them and their children. And who's in the middle, they stay in the middle, and who's at the bottom stay at the bottom. And don't you dare try to move up the hierarchy. That's just how it's set. But just back to what I was saying about fear. We're human beings and we're all born with emotions, and fear is one of those. And it's funny how that one little emotion can cripple you from taking a step and doing things, taking chances, feeling that you don't feel like you have the power to do things, but you can. But fear, like I said, fear stems from something and it stems into other things. Like my fear stems from born into rejection from both sides of the family, from mother and father, right? And then it stems into other things. And the other things are, when you live that kind of life, you feel a sense of unworthiness. Why? Because of that rejection, you get fearful. So guess what happens now? You start living a rejected life every day. You feel unworthy. You feel like you don't belong. And a lot of our kids are living that way with no sense of belonging. Yes, some of them act out and they do things. No, I'm not finding any excuse for their actions now, right? But some persons, they're struggling with things because of fear, because of rejection. Well, let me talk about myself, right? And it stems over into other things. That feeling of unworthiness. You don't feel like you belong, right? And how do you fix that? How do you fix that? Oh, look, you're up. Okay, sit Oreo. No, not time for that. Right, but how does one fix that? Well, I've been watching Crystal Tomlinson, and she has that fear thing pretty much covered, because she has a book about killing fear and stuff like that. And I'm like, wow, she puts it perfectly. Kill fear. How do you kill fear? How do you kill the fear? How do you kill that thing that's paralyzing you, that emotion that is paralyzing you from doing, from taking the steps that you need to take, from doing the things that you need to be doing? How do you kill fear? And like I said, she has that pretty much covered, right? But for me, it was like a deprogramming. It's like a light bulb went off when and it was at church too, right? A light bulb went off when when you can only free yourself mentally. I think Bob Marley says that. Free yourself from mental slavery. Well, I had to free myself from fear. How did I do that? It's by recognizing that all that thing was just in my head. It was in my head because growing up and persons would project certain things onto you, make you feel like you're less than, and don't you dare think this. It's like you're trained to think a particular way. So I had to reprogram and say, hey, anything is possible for you. Whatever this person can do, you can do it too. And not do it to compete with them, but do it for uplifting yourself. Because we don't need to compete with each other. We don't need to do that, right? So how I tackled that fear was a reprogram, like a reset in my mind. That whatever I put my mind, as cliche as it sounds, whatever you put your mind to, you can do it. You can do it because whatever you manufacture, whatever you plant, whatever seeds you plant in this fragile thing in your brain, and it flourishes. Well, flourishing with hope, there you go. It grows and flourish into whatever you want it to be, right? Mind you that you will face some struggles in shaping that thing, but whatever you deposit in here, it grows into whatever you want it to be, despite whatever challenges that come up along the way. It will. So for me, I had to unpack the fear, but then I had to figure out, why was I fearful? And then I found the root of the problem, and then I realized that where it stemmed from and what it stems into. So as a child, this is why it's important for children to understand who they are. It's very important because if they don't know who they are, they'll believe whatever somebody project onto them. They will believe it and they live it. So can you imagine a child growing up believing whatever you project onto them? They're gonna live that way. It's gonna shape their thinking and their experiences. And then that's just the life that they're gonna live. Right? So for me, I had to unpack fear. And like I said, fear stems from something and it stems into something else. And that can cripple you from living at your fullest potential. Another thing I had to unpack was unforgiveness. Yeah, unforgiveness. Wow. Walking around with unforgiveness is no joke. As my pastor put it, walking around with unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the next person to die. I was like, what? What are you saying? What do you mean? If I choose not to forgive somebody, that's my problem. How is that, But then when I thought about it, it's like you're walking around with this thing. Each time you see that person, it does something to you, and it's true. Got to think long and hard about that. I'm like, wow. But it does make sense. It does make sense because it's like an apple, right? If a part of that apple goes bad, if you don't cut it off, it spreads. So can you imagine your heart? Your heart is supposed to be filled with love. And you have one speck of unforgiveness in that heart. What do you think is going to happen? It's going to fester and then spread. And then the next thing you know, you have unforgiveness you're walking around with unforgiveness for everybody. Like the least little thing they do, you're just walking around with this heavy weight. So I had to go through and see, who do I need to forgive? Who do I need to forgive? And that was the best thing I could have done for myself. The moment I started unpacking those stuff, It's the lightest I was. I have released that thing from my heart that was holding me hostage and in bondage. And those persons that I need to forgive no longer have a hold over me. So that's one of the things I had to unpack as well, unforgiveness, because trust me, it's not good. It's not good. Another thing I had to unpack was past hurt. Sometimes we have been through some things, and past hurt, it can limit you. Sometimes we have to just let go of some stuff. Whatever things have been done, things that happened in the past, we got to let it go. Because then it's like driving and looking in the rear view mirror. We don't need to be looking in the rear view mirror. You look ahead. You look ahead. The only time I tend to kind of peep into the rear view mirrors of life is for recall of past victories, because that fuels me, right? Yes, sometimes you're there and our mind will try to pull us back in some places where our people will try to remind you of stuff that you're trying to forget. That's one thing. Or our mind will go back to places, think about things that happened to us, think about unfortunate things that happened to us, and it makes us angry. So sometimes you can remember the past experience for a few things as reminders. For me, I use my past experience as stepping stone or lessons learned, right? I don't dwell on the past things. So I've learned to let go of past hurt, things that have hurt me in the past, right? So, because if I dwell on it, I'm going to linger there and I may never get to destiny, right? So there's no way my past hurt is going to help me, is going to hinder me from getting to my destiny, right? So I had to unpack that as well. So a few things I had to unpack. Fear, right? Which is an emotion. It's a crippling feeling that can paralyze you from living at your fullest potential. And guess what? Fear stems from something and it stems into other things. For me, my fear stems from me being born in a certain situation that caused me to live a rejected life as quote unquote bastard child, right? Then that same fear stemmed into other areas of my life. It stemmed into that feeling of unworthiness. It stemmed into the unforgiveness. It stemmed into unforgiveness. What's the other one? Okay, so fear stems from rejection. It stems into other areas of my life, which is unworthiness, that feeling, that sense of not belonging, unworthiness, and unforgiveness. And my friends, some persons think that when you forgive someone, it means that you have to reconcile. That's what I thought. And it's thinking like that hindered me that was holding me back. Thinking like that held me back because I thought, I'm not going to forgive this person. And if I have to forgive them, I have to say it to their face and I have to reconcile with them. No. Again, back to church. Forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. And that's something I had to learn. It does not mean that You have to reconcile with someone, because some persons will never admit to something they have done. And yeah, so you have to release it. You have to release that person's from your heart. Release them from your heart. Now make them take up residence in your heart. How you kick them out of your heart is by forgiving them. And you can love that person from a distance. So when you see that person, you don't have it doesn't raise your blood pressure. You don't feel nothing. It's like seeing somebody else outside. Because when you see people on the street, you don't feel anything. It's just a neutral feeling. Right? And to forgive someone, you don't have to. And sometimes we have to forgive ourselves. The biggest forgiveness is forgiving yourself. You have to forgive yourself. If you can't forgive yourself, how are you going to forgive somebody else? How are you going to forgive somebody else? I remember my coworker Unica. She told me of an experience with herself and her dad, with the scripture that says, "Love your neighbor as thyself." And she said her dad said to her, most persons are caught up on the part that says, "Love thy neighbor," but they never pay attention to thyself. And if you think about it, I'm like, I never thought about it like that, right? And it's true, because how can you give something that you don't have? It says to love your neighbor as thyself. What if you don't love yourself? How are you going to love your neighbor? But most people are caught up in trying to do good to their neighbor when they don't really love themselves, right? So this thing, forgiveness, we have to learn to forgive ourselves as well, not just others. So what it is that you need to forgive yourself with. I had to forgive myself for a lot of things, because I'm not perfect. I am far from perfection. So those are the things that I had to unpack, right? So just as Hope had to go through a pruning process and cut some limbs and prune some stuff, I had to unpack some stuff. I couldn't grow with all that baggage. I could not grow with all that emotional baggage on the inside. That would be stunted growth. There wouldn't be any development if I walk around with all that baggage. So for me to flourish, I had to unpack some stuff. Unpack the dead weight, cut the dead weight, the heavy weight, both physical and emotional and mental, right? Because our mental health is it's, especially in these times, is very important, right? So what do you need to unpack? Let me hear about it in the comment. All right, guys. Well, we have come to the end of another edition of Flourishing with Hope, right? And if you like my content, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Okay? All right. So see you on the next video, my beautiful people. Love ya. Bye-bye.